Hello there, Fiona Lewis there in Los Angeles. It's lovely to have you on the Purple Haze Show.
Well, hello, Nick. Lovely to talk to you.
And lovely to talk to you, Fiona. And just in case people don't know that you started off your career as a model, then you became an actress, and then you became a writer. And then those renovations too, but not on TV, in private.
Well, I did private renovations in France, if that's what you mean.
Yes. Where else would you do it, Fiona?
Well, after that experience, maybe in another country.
Okay. Can you speak French, by the way?
I do speak French, yes. I went to university when I was 16 in Grenoble, and I got my first boyfriend there. So there you are. Instead of going to school, I had a boyfriend. He taught me, he didn't speak a word of English. So I started out saying rather naughty French slang words before I actually learned the language. But I didn't know I was talking dirty. It was a sort of trick he played on me. I didn't start off saying, can I get a cup of coffee? It was usually something much naughtier than that in French.
I know a naughty word, derriere.
Yes, well, that's not very naughty.
Oh.
I couldn't speak a word until I went there, and then you're forced to learn. Also, when you're young, you tend to pick it up pretty quickly.
Fiona, let's start at the start. Now, you were born in a rather exotically named, is it a village, is it a town, is it a city?
I was actually born in a seaside village called Westcliff-on-Sea in Essex, about an hour from London. And then after that, we moved to a little village in Essex called Paglesham. And my father bought an old Georgian house there, but it was in the middle of nowhere.
Your father, what was his profession?
My father was a lawyer who then became a judge. And then at the age of 11, like everybody else, I was sent to boarding school. And then after boarding school, I had to get a job, as one did in those days. And I worked for an airline, a now defunct little airline. And then I sort of became a model. I don't quite know how it happened. I think because I was sharing a flat with Jacqueline Bisset, and we were both models. I mean, in those days, it was easier. You just slipped into modeling, and then you slipped into acting. I don't quite know how it happened, but it did happen in those days.
Yeah, I've seen the proof, Fiona. You're in the movies.
Right, because none of us knew what we were doing, but we were in the movies.
Was he a strict parent?
No, parents, well, they were very English, so you talked about everything else except your feelings or whatever. But they weren't terribly strict, except, of course, when I went to London and the 60s had exploded, and then my mother was horrified because the change from the 50s to the 60s was so dramatic from our parents' point of view. It was extraordinary. 1 minute I was in the countryside, a nice girl, just out of the convent, and the next I was walking along the King's Road in a miniskirt and having boyfriends, and she was appalled, of course. She was born in 1917, but it was very extraordinary, the 60s, how it exploded like that, and everything was so different, because the 50s, I'm sure the 50s where you are were the same. They were just completely dour, and everything was grey and brown, and nobody had any clothes. It was a bit grim. And people kind of kept their place in those days. There was no breaking free and suddenly, like in the 60s, you become a dress designer. The class barriers disappeared in England in the 60s, which had never happened before. Everybody just kept it to their own station in the 50s. You minded your P's and Q's and so on.
Your parents, they carted you off to France, as you mentioned.
Well, growing up, I think everybody was in the same boat. You were in England. And honestly, my father said to me when he did send me off to France at 16, he said later, I must have been out of my mind sending a 16-year-old off. Well, when we got there, I was supposed to be staying in a French pension in Grenoble. But of course, it was some French woman who was just making money, and you could do whatever you liked. You got a room, and you got one horrible meal a day, and then basically she didn't care whether you came or went. So obviously my parents thought I was in good hands, but in fact it was very lax. I mean, I don't think you'd send a 16-year-old off now to live in a foreign country by themselves.
No, families don't even let 16-year-olds cross the road because of all the nasty people.
Cross the road?
Yeah.
I think they're right nowadays. Things have changed out there in the streets.
Well, it seems to be a more dangerous place. You graduated from the school there?
I left, actually. I did my, what's it called? I forget what it's called now. But at 15 or 16, you take your O-levels, and then I left as soon as I could because I really didn't like it there. I didn't like the nuns, and I didn't like anything about it. My father wanted me to go to university, but I don't think I could. I was too young or something, but I could go to France to a university there. It was like a year's French tuition. So he said, well, all right, well, if you're not going to go to university here, then you go there. But I can't say I got any education, really. I mean, I had no education at all. I don't think I read a book until I left school.
Did you have some sort of ambition? Did you have some sort of goal? Or was just, it's the 60s now and I'll just go out and have a good time?
I was in France, and then I fell in love, I thought, with this guy, and then that was over, and then I had to get a job, so I got a job in London as an airline, and the thing was everybody who lived in the country wanted to get to London because it was only 1964, but it had started, the Beatles and everything, and the fashions, the miniskirts, and so somebody, I forget who, said to me, oh, there's this girl, Jacqueline Bisset, she's looking for a roommate. So I went to meet her, and it was a bed sitter. It was one room with a gas ring, and the bathroom's 2 flights down, as was the phone. But it was like £3.10 a week each. So we met. I hadn't met her before, and she was just started to be a model. And when I was fired from my job at Eagle Airways for talking on the phone to my boyfriend in France.
Not Eddie the Eagle Airways, I hope.
I don't know. I don't know, but it didn't last very long, Eagle Airways. And then Jackie said, going to the school, Lucy Clayton Modeling, I go there, and why don't you come along? And so that was it. Then we were both models. We moved to just near Chelsea. We had a slightly larger flat, 2 rooms and a gas ring. And there we were, walking up and down the King's Road, and it was all supposedly groovy. I mean, what was interesting about the 60s was that it was all supposed to be about peace and love and freedom, but in fact it was about sex. I mean, it was about one-night stands. That's all women's lib was then. And girls were very unprepared as to how to handle it. You hiked up your skirt and told everyone how cool and groovy you were, but I think I was, and most of the women I knew, everybody was looking for romance, but it wasn't. It was really just about liberation, sex. So it was odd way to be thrust into the world as a woman, especially if you were 18, because, well, the same thing now, relationships were hard to come by and hard to get, just as they are now, and sex was available, but that's about it. And then you went home and hoped the guy would send you flowers, which he never did, because everything was supposed to be equal now. So it was an odd time for women. I don't think people realized that it wasn't satisfying for women, it was tricky at that age. And everybody was drinking and smoking pot and saying how terrific everything was. But I found it rather unsettling. And so did everybody else, because nobody talked about it, because nobody wanted to admit. Yeah, the guys were having a great time, but a lot of the women weren't.
Did young Jackie feel the same way, or you never discussed?
We didn't discuss it because, well, first of all, being English, we didn't talk about how we felt. I mean, that's really a modern thing. Now everybody talks about how they feel ad nauseum. But in those days, we were just trying to be cool and get the right clothes. If you got the right clothes, then you were hip. But in retrospect, I've talked to her about this, and she sort of felt the same thing. You're looking to get a nice guy and fall in love. But it was also new in the 60s, that sexual freedom, going on the pill, and also you had nothing to compare it with in the 60s. There was nobody to advise you. You certainly couldn't discuss it with your parents. So you just carried on. And then finally, if you're lucky, you found someone to have some sort of relationship with.
It's not portrayed like that in the 60s movies I've been watching, Fiona.
Of course not, because it was groovy, baby.
And also, the films were made by men.
That's right. And so if you look back, well, I did a part. There was a movie called Casino Royale. Casino Royale. This was one of the Bond pictures, and which they've remade. But Jackie had a part, the part of Miss Goodsize. It's a sizable part. She got me a walk-on. It was one of those movies where every dolly bird in London, there were lots of scenes with girls. And all we did was we stood behind Orson Welles at the baccarat table and went, ooh and ah, every time.
He could cover a few girls with his girth, couldn't he?
Yeah, exactly. You didn't want to stand right behind him, then you weren't seen at all.
Exactly.
And that's what a lot of the parts were in movies then. You were a dolly bird wearing some skimpy little outfit and smiling, and it was all sexy and fun. I mean, there were obviously a few of those Tony Richardson movies. Kitchen sink dramas were starting to be important, where a woman had the lead role, but it was quite rare. It was all about how short you could wear your skirt, especially if it was a swinging movie.
There was always a woman in that kitchen sink. I never saw John Osborne washing the dishes or anything like that.
No. Exactly. There were those gritty movies that were coming out, but the fun movies, the girls' parts were incidental. It was just in the beginning, actually. Soon after that, every movie, they wanted you to take your clothes off. And good actress, Glenda Jackson, soon after that, whipping off her clothes in movies and winning awards. So it was like, oh, okay, well, it's Glenda Jackson. I guess I can't make a fuss. If Glenda could do it.
Now, I'm assuming this is one of these girly type roles that you're speaking about. Your first credit is a French title, Dis-moi. Excuse my French, by the way.
Dis-moi qui tue, yes.
Yes.
So what happened is that, when I say Casino Royale, it wasn't quite my first movie. My first movie was in a Roman Polanski movie, believe it or not. It was a movie called, well, in America, I think it's called The Vampire Killers, or...
The Fearless Vampire...
The Fearless Vampire Killers. Pardon me. Your teeth, yes, it had several. Yes, pardon me. So I had a little part in that about like a serving wench who gets bitten very early on by the vampire.
By Alfie.
By Alfie Bass, exactly.
He was a Jewish vampire, and the crucifix didn't work on him because he was Jewish.
That's right, that's right. Well, you've done your homework, yes. I've forgotten about that. And then Roman and I had been having a little fling. I mean, we were more friends than having a great affair. We liked each other, and then I did that little part in the movie, and that's when he fell in love with Sharon Tate. But he had recommended me to a French producer who was looking for a teenage girl to be with a gang of kids who tried to solve a robbery in France. I mean, the star of the movie was Michel Morgan. So I did this little movie in French. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. I mean, honestly, when I look back, I should have taken some lessons. So that was really the second movie I did.
Fiona, there's another one here made by an Italian called Alberto Sordi, who was a big Italian film star, but this was all shot in
London.
Yeah, smoke over London.
When they make Italian movies, everybody speaks whatever language they speak.
There's a story, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but there's a story that John Wayne did an Italian film, and just through the whole movie he just went rhubarb, 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 and they just voice dialogued him in the post.
It's quite possible because I was talking, Alberto Sordi was speaking Italian, I was speaking English, other people were speaking, and if you see the movie it shows. I played groovy London pop star, so I was mouthing into a mic of these songs and dressed in feathers. I have no recall about what the movie was about, I have to say.
It was in Italian, Fiona. You would know.
Exactly. Well, I never showed in England, so I have no idea.
Fuomo. Anyway, Fuomo obviously is...
Fumo, I think it means London smoke.
Fiona, you would have been enjoying this acting business though, wouldn't you?
It was great fun, but I was aware that I wasn't perhaps the best actress in the world, so I enjoyed it. And
Fiona, you improved a lot.
I improved a bit. I can't say that I improved a lot.
Okay.
Once you become an actress and then you're making money and you've got friends in the business and you're having a good time, and so whether you're a good actress or not, you're going, well, yes, I want more of this. But nowadays I don't think that would happen because it's much more competitive and people have to work really hard to get a movie.
Don't know if Steven Seagal and people like that can act much.
But he's got sort of different macho appeal. Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't much good either. But if you want to actually get good parts, you have to really know your stuff. In those days, it wasn't really like every pretty little girl in England thought, oh, I'll be an actress or a model. It wasn't like that then, whereas now I think that's very much the case. You think, oh, I'll go to New York and I'll be a model and maybe I'll try out as an actress. In those days, well, first of all, I think it was sort of frowned upon a bit. Becoming a model was sort of a pseudonym for loose morals. Or as they used to say in the 70s, a bit later, if you were a model/actress, they called you a mattress, which was delightful. It's the sort of thing you could get away with in those days.
Oh, you mean Twiggy was a mattress? Oh, I didn't know that.
Exactly, that's what they called them.
Oh, dear.
And we were all we didn't even protest.
In a spring?
Yes, highly sprung.
I watched Strange Behaviour, and on the audio track, Day Young, I don't know if you've heard the audio track, Day Young said, you were a really good actress, maybe that you knew that you were quitting already, but she was very impressed with your acting. So there you go.
Really? Must have improved a bit. That is very nice of her to say so.
Yes, and she's a third party, so she's being objective. And she's an actress too, by the way.
Yes, I know. In fact, I ran into her not long ago. She became a sculptress.
Now, I noticed that your early roles, you were a blonde.
Yes, I went back and forth. I started out, maybe I started out blonde, and then my real color is dark, and then I used to go backwards and forwards.
That wasn't for the particular film roles or for modelling, you just go back and forth?
No, it was just that it was cool to be blonde, and then it was cool not to be blonde or whatever.
Oh, those crazy 60s, Fiona.
They were crazy.
They've got a lot to answer for. But I'm going to call you like a second lead around these days, and you worked with some amazing people. A film that I couldn't find, but I have seen it before, and apparently it's very rare, but it was on Australian TV. Where's Jack?
Oh, yes.
So that was a nice period film, and that was directed...
James Clavell, who actually wrote those books like Taipan. He wrote some very big bestsellers.
Did you know he was Australian?
I didn't actually know.
Yes,
I didn't know
he's Australian. Well, he kept it hidden, didn't he?
Well, he did. He didn't have an accent, so...
He was born in Sydney. I think he was in England for a long time. But because in the 60s, there was still a lot of the class system over there in the UK,
Oh,
wasn't
completely. No, it was very much... It was groovy to be young and working class. If you were creative, if you were designing clothes or shoes, or if you were an actor. But apart from that, the rest of England... That was in London. The rest of England was still very snobby and totally class conscious.
In the 60s, I think finally what happened was the arts were recognised, and a lot of these great English artists like John Osborne, it was trendy to come from the working class and make it.
Oh, yeah. It was really cool to be from the north of England and have the north country accent. It was cool. In fact, it was frowned on if you were an aristo and you had a posh accent. All the talented people came from somewhere else. They came from the north, or Wales or somewhere. And also, you had to be young. You had to be in your 20s. So that was what was great, the cultural change in England. That was very exciting. That you honestly thought that if you were talented in any respect, you could really become something. There'd be no opportunities in England to rise above whoever you were. Suddenly, now you could become anything. You could become a director, a rock star. It was exciting.
Now, you were getting work pretty regularly, even though you put down your acting skills, but you were getting work regularly. So how did the work flow for you, Fiona?
I think that I was just good enough, and I think it was just easier then. I really do. It wasn't so competitive. I mean, I didn't do any theatre, so I wouldn't have got a part in the theatre, but I was cute looking, and, I was good enough, and with the right director. When Roman Polanski's movie, even though I had a few lines, he spelled out every line for me and told me how I should just throw it away and not make it too much of a deal with it. So I was good in that because he showed me. And not all directors are like that. They're basically busy doing something else, being technical. So if I got somebody who paid a little attention to me, then I was all right. If you sort of don't even know how to get in front of a camera and talk, which I honestly believe that had I had a bit more practice in just getting out in the middle of a room and just showing off, then that would have been a start. Most of the fear is about, oh my God, all these people are looking at me. It sounds trite, but I think fear is a lot of the problem. And if you go to drama school, you lose that fear. You get in the habit of just standing out there and doing it. And then later on, you get your craft down and you learn how to emote and be emotional. When the first thing you do is a movie, I didn't really have any time to learn what to do. I did go to one acting class. There was an actor called Jack McGowan who was in the Polanski vampire movie.
Roman liked him because he was the lead in Cul-de-sac.
Right. Well, he was a wonderful, wonderful actor. And he said, you should go to the Stanislavski school that he had a friend who was running. And I went there, but the first lesson I went to was stand on the stage and become a tree and be emotional as a tree. Well, for an English girl. I just started giggling and went, yeah, okay. That didn't work at all. Could I be a funny tree?
Well, one of the reasons we're talking to you, besides your latest book, your autobiography, is that whether you like it or not, is we call you cult movie actress Fiona Lewis. And that's because you're in a lot of genre films, for instance, Dr. Phibes, the Dan Curtis Dracula movie. So when you were given a script, did you have a process? Tell us a bit about that, Fiona.
Do you mean when I was offered a movie?
Yes, so you were offered a movie. Would you always take it, or would you sometimes say, no, no, I don't want to do that
No,
part?
there were a couple of movies. When you're an out-of-work actress, in other words, 6 months have gone by and you've been up for a lot of auditions and nothing's happening, you're then saying, oh my God, I've got to pay the rent. I've got to get a job. And so you might take a movie that you wouldn't normally take, or you thought, well, this is a bit silly. But you take it and say, I'll try and do the best I can with it and talk to the director and see if there's something you can make of it to make it your own. It seemed to be that once I'd done one, well, I did the Polanski movie, and then that was a horror movie, and it seemed to me then I was just offered a lot of horror movies, cult movies, so that's what I took. Obviously, if you're doing a cult movie, it's not written like War and Peace. The scripts aren't always that brilliant. They're sometimes a little silly, but you just see what you can do with it and make something out of the part that's real, because a lot of the lines in horror movies are a little stilted, and a lot of the time you're just reacting and screaming or jumping up in the air or whatever. So you just do your best, and because it is a job, that's what you've decided to do for a living, and you have to work to survive. In those days, it wasn't like today where, especially in America, if you got a decent part in a movie, you'd be paid $500,000 or something. In those days, you were paid a couple of grand. Maybe that'll last you a year. Well, in England especially, there weren't those big salaries. I guess I'm sure if you were David Hemmings or someone, you could command a bigger price, but I don't think people weren't earning that much money.
Richard Burton was.
Right, because he was doing American movies.
That's right.
He was doing a lot of, and he said it often, because I did a movie with him, and he would say, yeah, well, I wanted the money. I wanted to work, but I wanted the money. In fact, he was always criticized when he was younger that he'd given up this brilliant theatrical career and sold out to movies. But, he came from a poor Welsh background.
Yeah, plus
he wanted to make it.
Plus, Fiona, he had to buy the world's most expensive diamonds for Lizzie.
That's it. It's tricky when you have to buy a tiara every week.
That's right. Well, she was a good actress. She deserved it.
She was terrific.
There's a couple of movies in the mid-70s I'd like to talk about, and one of them is one with the legendary rebel rouser, Oliver Reed, who was a very fine actor, and it was all set in this massive estate. Was it Lord Lichfield's estate? It was a big one.
No, it was it was a huge, it's what they call a house in England, and which is in fact a giant castle. And I forget the name of the lord, and who was complete young tearaway who'd decorated every wall of the inside of the castle. This beautiful, stately home that his parents had kept all the furniture for 6 centuries. He then he oil painted every single wall with graphic, sexual Kama Sutra pictures. Those were the days then when everybody went mad. Anyway, it was shot there, and it was a movie about cults and witchcraft, another movie that I wasn't quite sure what the story was about.
He played the butler.
He was the wicked butler, but he was a very good actor. He really was. And he was good. He taught me, he gave me a few acting tips that were very, very valuable.
You drink the vodka this way, Fiona, not that way.
Yeah, that's right. Well, because every night we retired to the local pub where Oliver's trick was that he would have a few pints or something more, and then he'd jump up on the bar and grab one of the lights in the ceiling and proceed to eat the light bulb. And his trick was to eat it without any blood coming out of his mouth. And he did this very successfully. It was amazing. He was a great showman. He did drink an enormous amount, and I think probably later on it wasn't good. But
caught up with him.
But he was very funny and very smart, and he was a good actor.
He had a famous uncle to look up to, Carol Reed.
Oh, yes, Carol Reed, exactly. Yes, that's true.
So when you did a film like Blue Blood, did you stay at the local hotel? Did you stay in the house?
No, we didn't stay in the house. We stayed...
Because the pictures on the wall were too disgusting.
Well, they were really, it was shocking. We stayed in, I think, some local hotel. At night, Oliver would be pounding up and down the corridors, sort of banging on people's doors after a few drinks. But it was fun. It was hilarious and crazy. In those days, you only needed 3 hours sleep anyway. And it was a party every night. It was great. And the story was, did you see the movie?
Yes.
It was about black magic in a stately home.
It was a bit like, the James Fox movie, The Servant. It reminded me of that.
Well, I think it was kind of a slight rip-off of that, where the butler is the evildoer and everybody is in his thrall.
And the Lord is ineffectual and impotent, basically.
Right. Right. So it was a kind of horror rip-off on The Servant, which, of course, was a fabulous movie.
And Derek Jacobi played the Lord just before he was...
Yes, that's right. It was the first movie he ever did.
Before he turned into a Roman emperor and did naughty things.
Yes, exactly.
With a stutter, though.
Yes, with a stutter. He was a lovely guy, lovely man.
The other film, which comes right next on your list of credits, and the one that you mentioned to me, Lisztomania, directed by... the late
Ken Russell.
Of course, the highlight of the movie is you, Sarah Kesselman, and a couple of others. Oh, an Australian girl called Nell Campbell.
Oh, yes, Nell Campbell. Yes, absolutely. Loved her.
Of course, she went on to fame and fortune opening a bar in New York.
Yes, a very well-known bar.
And you lovely ladies were sitting on a giant penis, Roger Daltrey. Now, I knew rock stars were well endowed, but that was ridiculous, Fiona.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be Franz Liszt, not exactly Roger Daltrey.
Oh, jeez.
But how do I know? I don't know.
How did he manage to play the piano with that thing?
I just don't know. The whole movie was crazy because Ken was really quite crazy. And as a director, he was a bit ferocious. He used a bullhorn, and even if he was standing 3 feet away, he would have this bullhorn and scare you to death with it if he didn't like what you were doing. He was a very interesting, very clever director, but he was a bit of a tyrant. I mean, he really was. We were doing this odd scene, I couldn't tell you why, but where Roger Daltrey plays Franz Liszt, the composer, and he depicted him as a modern-day rock star, which in fact Franz Liszt was in the mid-1800s, where women were swooning in the aisles and fainting. And so he had this scene in the movie, not quite sure how it fit in, where he plays Charlie Chaplin as Franz Liszt playing Charlie Chaplin, and I play Mrs. Chaplin, and we
Fiona, just to interrupt you, did you point out the fact that Charlie Chaplin wasn't even born when Franz Liszt was alive, or
well,
not?
Of course, but who am I to say to the great director that it was some take on silent movies? And so instead of what they would normally do now is just speed up the film for this little episode of us in a little log cabin making breakfast or whatever, we had to speed it up on the set and run around as if we were in a silent movie. And we must have done it 1,000 times, and he was never happy. And it was just, I just remember Roger and I looking at each other and going, we're going insane. And I think I actually had a tantrum and walked off the set. I don't know how I even dared do that, but I did. I think he said a few rude words to me through his bullhorn, and that was it for me.
Oh, he could have caused you damage to your ears with that thing.
Well, it was in the afternoon, and Ken had a bottle of wine at lunch, so it's always a bit tricky.
Is that why you said he always had these strange rosy red cheeks?
Well, I have to think maybe. I mean, he didn't have them when he was younger, but he was a talented guy, but he was a madman. What can I say? His wife was wonderful. She did all the costumes. She was a wonderful costume director.
I think she should take a lot of credit for his films.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think a lot of the ideas came from her, the whole design and the sets and everything. She was great. Anyway, yes, it was a weird picture. Ringo Starr plays the Pope. Then the giant penis. I can't remember what that scene was supposed to be, but I guess it was to show Franz Liszt's phallic prowess at some point.
Then Sarah Kesselman's character, the Russian Tsarina or whatever she was, she had a giant guillotine to chop it off.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, gosh, yes, I've forgotten about that lovely scene.
Anyway, some Australian director was obviously impressed with that movie because Sarah Kesselman's next film was in Australia, and Australia didn't make...
Oh, really? Good, though. She's a good actress, yeah. That was such an example of the early 70s. I mean, the fact that that movie got made was extraordinary, but everything was wacky and sexy and out there and anti-religious, irreverent, and that was the early 70s then.
There was no such thing as PC, politically correct, back in those days.
Anything went. That was it, the sexual revolution. Anything goes.
Now, Fiona, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Lisztomania, that would have been your final British film for a while because you went over to the United States, is that right?
That's right. I came over, I think, to do publicity. Something happened where they needed, obviously I wasn't the star of the movie, but Roger Daltrey couldn't. So I and a couple of other people came over to do publicity for Lisztomania. And then when I got here, I went up for a couple of movies and I got a movie here there, and then I'd been here for a few months and decided, God, the weather's fabulous here. I'm not going back. And just at that period in England where politically it was very tricky, there was the 3-day work week, everybody was on strike, and it was a bit gloomy and depressing. And also a lot of American film companies had pulled out of the British market, and there wasn't going to be much work there. And so when I came to LA, and that was kind of great, it was very much a smaller town then, and then I got this part in the movie, and I thought, wow, great. So I stayed. And it was a Dino De Laurentiis movie.
Drum,
which was, talk about tasteless. I mean...
I think that movie would not get made because...
it was completely racist.
It was totally racist.
It was appalling.
Dino, he could make movies, though.
He was a very good producer, and I do think that the language barrier, I honestly don't think he realized that it was racist. Well, he didn't speak English that well. I think he just got the script and period picture, lots of crinolines, and the guy... I'm forgetting the guy who played the main black servant.
Ken Norton,
right, was kind of a star just for then. You know,
he was a boxer, star boxer.
Yeah, he was a boxer. Yeah, really sweet guy, and I think it didn't cost very much. And he hadn't been in L.A. long, Dino De Laurentiis. Before that, he was in Rome, and he'd done some amazing.
He did Barbarella, a fellow that you knew. Roger Vadim directed that.
That's right. He did some other, I think he did Spartacus. I think he did some big Italian movies. You know, I think he worked with Fellini, too. He was a big producer guy, and he'd just come to Los Angeles then. I think this was his first movie in America. I don't think I realized at the time so much, but looking back, and it really was racist.
You have to see it to believe it.
You really do.
There's one thing I've got to tell you, I don't know if you know, but a lot of your films are now available on DVD, and what they can do with DVDs is they restore them, and they just look absolutely fabulous. I've got to tell you, Joanna, on Blu-ray, the British Film Institute, all I can say is it's delicious. The reds are so
really?
deep. It is just so beautiful in widescreen. If you've got a big telly, I don't have a huge telly, but it's on Blu-ray, and it just... My daughter's 16 years old, and she's been watching a few 60s movies, and she was asking me, why are these 60s movies so good looking? And the first thing I said, well, a lot of them have been restored, but a lot of it was this Kodak stock, because I went to film school in Los Angeles and I sort of learnt all this stuff. There was a particular stock, the nickname was Lolly Colour. Anyway, I don't know when, but in 1969 or 1970, they changed over to a new stock.
Oh, do you think so? Do you think that made a big difference when they had that Kodak film then?
I think it did, because there's nothing like this Lolly Colour. I don't know the stock number, the newer stock that replaced the Lolly Colour one. But actually, it wasn't that great a stock, because at film school in LA, we had George Lucas give selection. He was telling us that this was in the 90s, so only 15 years later, the Star Wars negative or whatever was looking awful 15 years later, because this stock that he shot on, Kodak, the one I think that replaced the Lolly Colour one or another one, was already deteriorating so bad that they had to get it off quickly, and I think luckily digital. Yes, so do yourself a favour if you've got a Blu-ray player.
I definitely would love to see that again, because it was, I'm not even sure what date that was, but it was quite a long while ago.
After Drum, when did you meet your first husband, Bill Hayward? Now, Bill Hayward was the son of a legendary, brilliant, but I don't know what the right word is, but she had a few mental health issues, Margaret Sullivan.
Right. She was an actress, and she did, I think her most famous movie was Shop Around the Corner.
The Mortal Storm, I think, was another one.
Oh, yes. And his father was Leland Hayward, who was a very big agent/producer who did The Old Man and the Sea and Spirit of St. Louis, Sound of Music. He was a big producer, and he was a very dashing man about town, sort of always known for his good manners, which I suppose a lot of other agents didn't have that reputation. And I met Bill Hayward, his son. We lived in the same apartment building in West Hollywood. I moved into an apartment there. It was on Hayworth Avenue off Fountain.
I lived on Fountain.
Oh, you did? So it was a tall Art Deco building, rather pretty, and I saw him a couple of times in the lift. And then my boyfriend before, who I'd broken up with, was an actor called Buck Henry. I don't know if you know who that is.
He was a graduate.
Yes, the graduate, right. He's like a comedian, actor, writer. And he loaned me a suitcase that was a rather smart Gucci suitcase that belonged to his former girlfriend, who was Bill Hayward's sister. So there was this rather amusing time when I'm coming coming down in the elevator, and Bill Hayward gets in, and I'm carrying, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm carrying the suitcase, and he said to me, "That's my sister's suitcase." And I went, "Really?" Feeling a bit embarrassed. Anyway, so that was the first meeting, and then he lived just a floor above me, and then we started seeing each other and going out, and very soon after that we got married.
Save on rent, just go upstairs.
Yeah, well, there you are. We did. We saved on rent right away. And he was, because of his parents, all his friends were, well, his best friend was Peter Fonda and Robert Mitchum's son, and they were all the sons and daughters of famous Hollywood people, and that's how he grew up, with birthday parties in the garden with circus animals and Joan Crawford coming. And what's interesting about that era is that the sons and daughters of very famous movie stars always have a hard time because they don't know what to do. They can't compete.
Fiona, I've interviewed a guy called Peter Lewis. Peter Lewis, I don't know if you've heard of a band called Moby Grape. They were very famous in the 60s.
Yeah.
Peter Lewis was the son of Loretta Young.
Oh.
And his mother wanted him to be a pilot. There was so much pressure on the poor fella that he had a really bad nervous breakdown in his teens and took many years to recover. I suppose it was harder. Medication was different back then, but
yes.
It was tough being the son or daughter of a star back then.
Because how can you ever live up to, you can't become your parents. They were producers, directors, movie stars, and probably you weren't as talented as they were. So there were a lot of these lost boys and girls. 70s it was drugs, so it was strange in Hollywood for these people. Oh God, you're so lucky. But a lot of them were troubled in those days. Anyway, I married Bill Hayward.
You married trouble, Fiona, it sounds like.
I married trouble, yes. So it was a marriage that was fitful, and we divorced after 8 years.
He could have said to his dad, "Hey, Dad, look, I helped produce with young Peter Fonda a film called Easy Rider. You should be happy now."
That's right, and I think he did say that, but his father, who was of a certain age, looked at this movie, Easy Rider, and went, what is it? Because if you look at Easy Rider now, actually, it is a bit out there and very stoned, and what's the story? Not much. And from old Hollywood, you're going, well, yes, son, what's that? And I think that...
He should have said, "Hey, Dad, this film will change Hollywood like none of your films have."
That's right, and it did. But I think his father died very soon after that.
It had that bad an effect on him, did it?
Yes, well, I don't know. But he died, and then his mother had committed suicide, so he never quite had any satisfaction from pleasing his parents. So anyway, that's what it's like in the creative business. You have to compete with your parents. It's rough. He had done Easy Rider, and Peter Fonda was his best friend, and his mother had been married to Henry Fonda and William Wyler, so everybody was kind of related.
Not much to live up to there.
No, not much.
No. The Fury is an interesting film. It's another horror-type film. Brian DaPalma doing the flashy stuff, and a good Greek actor and a good Greek director, whose son, Nick, has done very well for himself as well. A guy called John Cassavetes.
Oh, yes. Well, he really was revered in Hollywood because he really did play his own game. He made his movies for not much money, and he wouldn't just take a part in anybody else's movie. He was a terrific guy. Good to work with, a nice, kind actor. In fact, there was a funny story that in The Fury, which is all about mind reading and kids who have superpowers, and when they have these superpowers, their nose starts bleeding and they can see the future, and which is the subplot.
Even Steven Spielberg's ex-wife had that trouble.
That's right. That's right, Amy Irving. So both John Cassavetes and I had one of these weird episodes where one of the children had put a curse on us, and we were spinning in the air, blood spurting out of every orifice. It was lunchtime on the set, and Brian said, "Okay, well, you better stay here because we're all going to lunch, ha-ha." And left us and turned all the lights off, and just as a joke, and then we found somebody to put them back on. We couldn't go to the cafeteria because we were dripping blood. And Cassavetes, we sat there eating our sandwiches. He said to me, "Aren't you glad you didn't bother to go to acting school for this scene?" He was funny and nice and kind to all the actors and just a good guy.
Have you visited Australia? Because you did visit New Zealand.
I haven't, but I want to, and I mean to, and I have a lot of Australian friends here, and I keep meaning to go, and for some reason I haven't.
You must come, Fiona.
Yes. I know it's fabulous.
And if you do pop in, we would love you to come into the studio and chat about your books. And
I will. I would love to.
Because unfortunately we're running out of time already. But they were interesting films. Michael S. Lachlan, who produced Joanna back in the day.
That's right. I knew him from way back then, and then I was friends later on with his girlfriend, Susanna Moore, who's a writer, and then he did The Strange Behavior and Strange Invasions as a director, which were really good, campy horror movies, and written by Bill Condon, who then became a director. And they were fun, and we shot them in New Zealand and had a great time. You're right. Back then, I noticed that in every cafe and every shop we went into, there was a picture of the Queen on the wall. I couldn't believe it. I went, oh my God, she's everywhere. Yeah.
And you were in Strange Invaders. You played one of the invaders, and you got shot, I think, by Paul Lamet. Actually, I've got to ask you, Paul Lamet, he was the star. Now, your lead character in your book is called Oscar Lamet. Any relation?
Well, no, I must have just had it at the back of my mind. I don't know, yes.
You didn't get a call from Paul Lamet saying, hey, why are you libeling me?
No, I didn't. In fact, I don't know what's happened to Paul Lamet. I don't think anyone's heard from him for a while.
He had quite a good career in the 70s.
Yeah, so he did, absolutely.
He married some,
No, he married Suzanne de Pass, who was, I'm not quite sure what her title is or was, but at Motown. She was, I think, at Motown Films. I'm not sure how long they were together. He was kind of a reluctant actor, I think.
He was pretty laid back in all his movies.
Yeah.
Tell us what the exact meaning of mistakes were made, some in French. What does that mean?
Mistakes were made, meaning in life, mistakes were made, and some in French is because it seems that a lot of my affairs in life were with Frenchmen.
You should try an Australian, Fiona.
Yes, exactly. Got to get over there. And it's also about having spent a childhood. My childhood summers were spent in the south of France, and my sort of longing when I had this more than midlife crisis was wanting to go back to France and just get back to the French countryside, which is what I did.
But you're not there now. You're in LA.
No, but I'm going very soon.
Okay.
Well, it's a bit chilly there now. I'm waiting for the sun to come out.
Just want to mention another interesting film. It's called Tintorera, Killer Tiger Shark, and you're in it for about the first 30 minutes, and it's such a bad movie. You meet this hairy man, and you sleep with him, and you run off in the nutty, and then you get eaten by a shark. The most disappointing thing was, Fiona, wasn't the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do music.
It was the Mexican version of Jaws, which was pretty lame, I got to say. I think I was offered quite a lot of money to go down and do it.
Somebody has released the DVD of Tintorera, and its initial theatrical run was 91 minutes. The DVD, it's 2 hours and 6 minutes.
Oh, no.
Yes.
This is awful.
You'll love that one.
I have to say, I'm incredibly impressed that you've watched all these movies of mine. I must say, I'm very, very impressed.
I started and I just couldn't stop. And like Day Young said on the audio track of Strange Behavior, there's a scene with you and Dan Shaw. Day Young says something like, look at those 4 cheekbones that are just so amazing looking. Something like that, anyway.
That's nice. Oh, how very nice of Day. Well, I do run into her now and again. I had no idea. I'm going to thank her.
Nothing but nice things. That's why I think that you're a good actress. See, I wouldn't know otherwise.
Well, I would be better now, I think, because I've lost that fear. As you get older, you also have more to draw on. When you're young, you have no experience in life, so you have no emotions to draw on. Now, of course, I could play Hamlet, but...
Like I said before, is if you do what I do, well, I didn't watch in chronological order, but I watched the ones that I could get hold of, and I could see, especially from that Saint episode where you were really sort of...
frozen.
You didn't seem that comfortable.
Terrified.
And by the time of Strange Behavior, you looked very comfortable and you were very good, and the part that you had to play, you were just fantastic. You're a bad girl, bad alien.
I was. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I call it as I see it, and damn, I've seen a lot of them.
Well, yes, I imagine you have. Well, thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Nick, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Lovely.
Bye, Fiona.
Goodbye.